All right, so hello again, everyone. My name is Charles Banfield, and I'm the founder of Karate Canucks, and I'm back with another of our series of conversations with prominent Canadian martial artists. And the goal of these videos, or this video series, is to capture the stories, advice, and opinions on various topics related to Canadian martial arts experience. And today I'm very pleased to be joined by somebody whose name has been long associated with elite level martial arts, and that's Sensei Cezar Borkowski. So Sensei Borkowski has over 50 years experience studying, researching, teaching, and competing in the martial arts. In 1972, he established Northern Karate, which is now one of the most successful, well-respected martial arts and personal development organizations in the world, currently boasting thousands of active students. Former internationally ranked competitor, Cezar Borkowski is a 6-time Canadian champion and was rated #1 by the North American Sport Karate Association. He's also received countless awards, trophies, and medals. In addition to authoring dozens of articles for a variety of martial arts publications, Sensei Borkowski's work has appeared in numerous books. And these include Modern Shotokan Karate, which he wrote, as well as co-authoring the best-selling The Complete Idiot's Guide to Martial Arts. He also researched and edited the history and traditions of Okinawan martial arts and contributed one of the introductory sections to Sensei Patrick McCarthy's top-selling book, the Bubishi, the Classic Manual of Combat. Sensei Borkowski has also been featured in international magazines, newspaper, and on radio and television. He lectures on a wide range of martial arts and related topics at events around the world. And in his spare time, he is the co-technical director of the Canadian Black Belt Hall of Fame and became an inductee in 2013. So welcome, Sensei Borkowski, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. I'm exhausted by that invitation, the description and all those fantastic accolades. I was looking around trying to figure out who you're talking about because it can't be me. So it's really an honor to speak to you. And you said all these wonderful things, but they're kind of on the wall, I guess, whatever you want to call it. And karate for me is just a regular thing that's part of my life. So let's talk about the regular stuff.
The regular stuff, yeah. Well, I guess after 50 years plus, in the business, if you will, I guess you collect a few accolades, whether you acknowledge them at the time or not. So usually I typically start these conversations with some basic background information or questions about your basic background information. So why don't we start with so where are you from? Where did you grow up, and so on?
Okay, I was born in Warsaw, Poland. I was born in the 50s. It was still fairly ravaged after the war, So it was a tough time. My father and my mother worked very, very hard. My father went for a visit to Canada in the early 60s, 61, and he never came back. So if you're lucky enough to leave a communist country, you couldn't really leave. It took 5.5 years before my mother finally was allowed to leave with myself, my two brothers. So we arrived in Canada in kind of mid-60s, later 60s, and a week after I was here, I was walking down Spadina and Bloor, and there was a Y there. I walked in, and there was a class going on, which was actually a self-defense class. It was people in sweatpants doing some martial arts. At that time, things were not so organized. So I didn't know what it was, but general jest. They told me to come back on Monday, whatever, at 7 o'clock, whatever. I did, and I started there. I was like 9, 10 years old. I didn't speak a word of English, and the reason why I was 9, 10-year-old walking around because my parents didn't speak any English. So I was I was the de facto adult of the family in some ways because I learned English faster than my brothers. So I was the one who was answering, bills and looking for things in the newspaper for apartments, whatever it was. So I was pretty autonomous. So at that age, I was looked after my own, welfare, if you will. So I went to the Y and I started. My parents didn't even know that I was doing martial arts. I learned English actually in a karate class. So my first words were actually, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I didn't know that we didn't say Ray, we say lay. So it was kind of a Soroka thing, you know, that's what people say lay. And I thought it was an English word that meant to bend your head down. But apparently there was something to the Japanese word for bow. So I learned 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and lay, you know, your head went like this. So, and that was it. That was like a, you know, duck to water. Once I was there, I didn't want to leave. I did every kind of combative training they had there, as long as I didn't have to pay for things. And it was pretty good to avoid the payment method. You just kind of move around a little bit. There's no records, there's no computers or anything like that. So I trained for about 6 months at the Y, and eventually they pulled me aside saying, here, you're here all the time, you know, whatever. So here, we'll give you membership. Just do this. So I started helping with the kids' classes very, very quickly, and I progressed from there. There was a sort of instructors, but my first instructor was a man by the name of Dave Usher, who was a great Chitaru black belt. He was one of the first generation black belts on the Master Soroka. Just after Shane Higashi and Monty Guest. And he kind of took me under his wing. He was also a very successful businessman, so he kind of helped me out a little bit. When I was a teenager, so he was kind of a de facto role model in a lot of ways with me. You know, he's the first guy I ever seen drive a convertible sports car. You know, he had a Vet, 67 Vet, and you know, he impressed me a great deal. He was kind of like Charles Bronson from the original movies. You know, he was a man's man, tough guy. You know, he had a house in Acapulco, and he was a really great karate guy, and he was very generous to the community. He had a lot of stories in very poor areas, and in some ways, maybe I learned how to deal with people through him as well. So he was a tough guy, lots of fights, wrestler. You know, he went from Greco-Roman wrestling into karate. So he had appreciation for kind of all combative things, and I think that stayed with me. Through him, I met Sensei Monty Guest, who kind of helped me a little bit to you know, nurture, and I was affiliated with the Soroka group, so I got to train sometimes at the main Hombu dojo. I met some different teachers, Fred Boyko, and you know, really impressed me, Hal Henshaw. And you know, I started hitting the tournament circuit. You know, first was the CNE competitions once or twice a year. Then eventually, you know, in the early 70s, there was a lot more tournaments. I started traveling. I made a lot of friends, and I learned a great deal of martial arts through competition. So basically, if I competed with somebody, I would say to them, "Can you show me the kata?" We would exchange some kata, some ideas, some sparring tips. You know, why do you throw a side kick like this? So I instantly had this kind of wide scope of appreciating martial arts. The other interesting thing about the Y was that every martial artist in Toronto, and Toronto was the kind of the hub of martial arts, came through there. So people like Park Jong-soo, who's one of the premier Taekwondo teachers in Canada, he came there first, and he kind of showed his stuff to the karate class. Another Huang, Hapkido instructor. So we had this continuous parade of people who came to kind of use the facility until they established their own schools. So very early, I was kind of exposed to other martial arts, not necessarily learning them, but kind of seeing them, appreciating that it's a holistic approach. It's not just single style of karate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting. So how old? You said you were about 9 or 10 when you first.
Right. Yeah. Well, by the time I was like 11, I was helping with the class already. You know, so it's progressed from there. And when I was in high school, grade 9, I inherited my high school karate class. I went to Northern Secondary High School. So a teacher by the name of Bert Lum, who was at Soroka Black Belt, he established a karate class there in 1971. The problem was that none of the kids listened to him. So after 2-3 classes, he says to me, you know, you're a brown belt, you're taking this over. I can't take this. So when I took over, they're the same age as I was, so I had a lot more control over them, you know. And as long as he was a math teacher, so as long as I maintained a good math mark, that's the only thing he cared about. I could run the karate club at the high school. So it became that math was the only homework I ever did, because I didn't want to lose the karate club, you know. So and we went from there. So from the high school club, I started going to tournaments, and we went to a couple local tournaments, and people, you know, used to be when your students would win a daytime division, they performed the kata, they would spar in the evening, and they said to me, "What's the name of your karate club?" I said, "I have no idea. What do you mean? What's the name of your karate club?" I said, "Northern Karate."
And there you
there
go.
It was.
So that was when you were in grade 9.
Right. That's
so when was it? How old were you? Sorry, how old were you when you started training in karate? Was it like when you're about 10, 11 years old?
Yeah, it was about 10. Yeah.
Right at that time. Okay, wow.
Yeah.
So that must have been, I would assume that must have been somewhat rare to have somebody your age at that time involved in karate, because
Right. There were no kids classes. You trained with the adults, you know.
with the adults.
At
Okay.
the Y, eventually they developed a kids class, which is very, very small. But I always trained with the adults. And in fact, I mostly trained with women because the one or two kids that were there were predominantly, if there's few women training there, they would do kata, right? And the men would predominantly spar. So even the early competitions, there was kata division for women, but there's no sparring for women. There's only sparring for men. And eventually they developed kata for men and eventually sparring for women. But at the beginning, women did kata and men did sparring.
That's interesting. But there couldn't have been very many kids your age doing it at that time, or were there many? But
no, we you know, through like tournaments and things like that, I would run into you know, other kids. Later on, developed very good friendship. When I was 15, 16, I met another 15, 16-year-old. His name is Frank DiLorenzo from Hamilton. And Mike Warren, other guys. We were kind of unusual because we were black belts at that early age. So we became. I'm still very good friends with Frank DiLorenzo, who's an outstanding guy and is a great, really great black belt. And you know, it's amazing how he progressed. So
yeah, and lifelong friendships too, I'm sure. Yeah. So you mentioned David Usher and Monty Guest, and you said the Soroka organization as well. You know, those are obviously some of your, well, Monty Guest and David Usher would have been your first instructors, perhaps.
right.
I'm sure over the years you would have trained with a number of teachers.
Right.
Would you mind sharing some of that information?
One of the teachers who really made an impact on me was well, first of all, I would learn by watching as well. So, you know, we're talking about Wally Slokey before the interview. It was Wally Slokey, Ted Martin, other people that I really admired. They were my role models. So, you know, I would watch and kind of imitate what they're doing and kind of take on their persona and their techniques, things like that. But the person who actually kind of helped me teaching and you know, physically teaching was Robert Dalgleish. Robert Dalgleish was basically the founder of Goju in Canada. He's a Soroka black belt who went out. He was a merchant marine. He traveled around the world. He met Gosei Yamaguchi in San Francisco and eventually made his way to Japan for a very short time. And he learned Goju-Ryu, and that's where the Eastern Karate School comes from. You know, he was the kind of the father of Canadian Goju-Ryu, Bob Dalgleish. And you know, I trained with him. He would come down to seminars. We would go to Sudbury to train with him for weekends and things like that. And I learned some Goju-Ryu, good enough to be graded as a Shodan 1973 Goju-Ryu, and I had my Nidan in 1974 from Bob Dalgleish from a group called Canada Goju Kai. I still have the certificate, which has Canada Goose on it, you know, and he was very progressive guy. He wanted to have a Canada Goose rather than a dragon or a tiger on certificate. And as most people know, he developed a kata called the Wolverine.
Wolverine, yeah.
Which of course is all very you know, very unusual. Even though he taught what we used to call back then Oriental martial arts. You know, maybe the term is not so progressive anymore. But he was very pro-Canadian. You know, he everything involved the maple leaf or Canada Goose, whatever. And he helped so many people. He really you know, so anybody who now practices other kind of brand of martial Goju-Ryu, they went to Okinawa. There's quite a lot of people doing Neibukan style in Canada and Jundokan style in Canada. In some ways, they're connected to Eastern Karate and ultimately Robert Dalgleish, Bob Dalgleish.
So you're exposed to a number of different styles. So where did Shotokan come into the picture?
I basically, you know, Shotokan is something that I kind of adopted, but really I would consider myself a Chito-Ryu black belt, The Chito-Ryu was very different, you know, in some ways. There were a couple major dates that changed Chito-Ryu. 72, 75, the World Championships. It became quite obvious to Soroka Sensei that Chito-Ryu was not really a sport karate style, if you will, you know. So at that time you had to do Shotokan Karate in order to win in kata. And so the progression of the World Championship would be Shotokan people would win in the 70s, then Shito-ryu people started competing, Goju-ryu people, and now the style called Rue-ryu, which was kind of brought forward by famous teacher Sakamoto Tsugo, is now kind of the go-to style. And some of the katas from that style, like Hanan and Peiho and other katas, were adopted into Shito-ryu and other systems. So now there's this kind of like a world traditional sport karate style. So, but you can actually trace the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. There were different kind of groups. A lot had to do with who's actually running the tournaments, who actually was controlling the world karate kind of movement. So the first was WUKO, then was WKF, etc. Different kind of groups. Now it's Olympic karate. And a lot of times the person and the main director or the person at the helm tends to kind of make it Shotokan based, or make it Shito-ryu based, or make it Goju-ryu based, etc., etc. And now the international competition, like Olympics, if it does happen, this year, which I don't think it will, you can actually perform open kata. So now you can actually perform your own creative kata in what we deem as a traditional venue.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I was not aware of that. I thought there was a list of approved.
The Shita kata, is basically gone. That's basically the required katas, because people start making their own variations. First of all, if you have the name like Kushanku on the list, well, you can do it any way you want it, as long as you call it Kushanku. So I mean, the people who are judging it, they realize that there's so many variations of it that basically, if you have a movement that begins the same way and ends the same way, you can pretty much do anything you want in between. So they just said, just do open forms basically. And most people still adhere to, the super unpei katas and other katas, which are very powerful anyways. That's the thing about people, making creative things. Creativity is very good, but it's not necessarily better than what existed before. So in karate and martial arts, we follow this concept of onkochi shin, which is study the old to understand the new, or preserve the past in order to foster the future. I'm very progressive, and I'm really interested in developing new concepts, new ideas, but it doesn't mean that necessarily better than what is in the past, right? So you have this kind of duality of research, which is looking in the past, really looking in the past. I'm not talking about reading a book or going on the internet, looking at Google or Wikipedia post, and learning names and dates, which are artificial. One person said that, and everybody kind of copies. It's like a telephone going through. So when you actually start, for the last 30 years, I've been going to Okinawa pretty regularly, and I became quite affiliated with a lot of the senior teachers, and I met quite a few people. One person, Hokama Tetsuhiro, who's very well known for being a curator of his own karate museum. When I asked him a question, he was the first person I ever met. When I asked him a question, he says, "I don't know, let's find out." Up to this point, anybody I spoke to, they had all the answers. And if I had a different opinion, I was wrong, they were right. But he said, "Get in the car, we go, we find out." So I've done with him what he called field research. We would go to people's houses and knock on doors, and met grandkids of people and uncles and aunts and next door neighbors. After somebody passed away, we'd speak to them, we would share some memory. And what I learned from really was to question everything, And to this day, if you ask him a question, he says, "Why? I don't know. Maybe, okay, I think about it." So after his 60 plus years of researching, he's a very interesting guy. The reason most people know the name Hokama Tetsuhiro, but they don't realize that from a very young age, from high school, he was a recording secretary for the Okinawa Karate Federation, one of the first groups in Okinawa. And the reason why he knows all this stuff, because he was the guy who's writing it down. So when the master, we're talking about Chojin Miyagi already passed, but other masters like Taguchi and Nagamine Soshin and Haketsuya would speak, Hokama would be the one who's writing down all the words they're saying. So he had a first-hand knowledge, and he had a seat at the big table because he was a recording secretary, and he did that for 20 years. So the papers he collected and the questions he asked, this information is invaluable.
So question everything.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
one of my famous koans. If you meet Buddha on the street, kill him, because he's not the authentic Buddha, right? So
so back when 50 odd years or so ago, that when you started training,
I'm always curious. I was born in the 70s, and I actually didn't come to the martial arts until it was like more like the 90s. So I was kind of late getting started and so on. And I've noticed a bit of an evolution in the way training has evolved, I guess, over the last 20 years or so. How would you characterize, what training was like when you first started, and how would you say that it has evolved, and how your own training has evolved over time?
The major, there's a couple kind of historical things that happened. So the invention of internet changed karate. The invention of a VHS or beta tape changed karate. The fact that people actually started videotaping things with a camera, and Black Belt magazines sold these 8mm reel films. And the first two films they sold was Fumio Demura Karate and Fumio Demura Sai Techniques, and that was like $3.95 on the back of Black Belt magazine. So that information just was not available. There's no available. The word of your sensei was law. The problem was that your sensei didn't know very much either. They knew a few katas, they knew a few techniques. So what they told you is what they learned from whoever they taught them. So the information was passed from one person to the other. There was no broad scheme. You couldn't compare it to anything. So that's why we were so keen on tournaments, because in tournaments you could see people from other styles. I saw a guy wearing a gold belt. I saw another guy wearing a red sash, and he was doing Kun Tao martial arts, and he was from Michigan or Ohio area, whatever. Like, I never heard of Kun Tao, but I've been doing Silat now for 20 years, which is a Malaysian martial art. But much later. So that didn't exist at the beginning. I met an interesting black belt from Buffalo, New York, who was 18, 19 years old. His name was Joe Jennings, and he created Panther videos. So for his university graduation, he and another friend of mine, Bill Adams, they went to Asia. So they went to Okinawa. They got their shodan from Shimobuku Tatsuo, the founder of Isshinryu Karate. Bill came back. Joe Jennings went to Thailand, and he had this giant camera that his parents bought him for a graduation present. So he went to the Lumpini Stadium, and he videotaped people doing Muay Thai kickboxing. Right? Now, you have to realize, we've never seen Muay Thai kickboxing. We saw Muay Thai on the cover of Black Belt magazine, which are guys doing weird things, but we couldn't really picture what it looked like. We saw the pictures, we couldn't picture. He actually had this videotape of, not videotape, I guess it was videotape, before this beta, whatever, the tape was this big. He had this tape of people doing stuff. And he was at a tournament, Ting Fong Long's tournament, and people said, you have this tape of people doing Muay Thai. Can we have a copy of it? He says, sure, $20. And that was the beginning of Panther videos. He realized that by taping things, you could actually share stuff. So we would get these tapes. I got a tape on Hapkido, and I saw, wow, this is Hapkido, and I got a tape on this. And, so we that was the beginning. So the video age kind of opened our minds to other training methods, other styles. Of course, the internet made it all accessible. And now everybody is a Dai Hanshi from the University of Google. So everybody knows everything about every style without actually ever training. So, about 10 years ago, there was this site called bullshido.com where they would criticize people left and right. Yep. But everybody kind of joins the criticisms, like George Dillman and whatever. They would criticize him for these terrible things, all the things. But if you actually look at the people, and the guy who's running bullshido.com, the guy who's running it, he was about 450 pounds. So I don't think he could actually get out of the chair, much less, knock out George Dillman, whatever the thing was. It's just, we went from knowing nothing to, I've been training now 54 years. I went from training knowing nothing to now, and doing it as well as we could, to now people knowing everything and not doing it that well at all.
So you mentioned a couple of different arts,
Sure.
Silat and Muay Thai and whichever. And I know that you are very much involved with Kobudo training and teaching and so on. So what are the and we mentioned a few styles of karate already. So what would be the mosaic that makes up your martial arts background?
Well, I really teach my own system, and it's more based on principles and techniques and kata systems rather than a style per se. So we do Shorin katas, we do Goju katas, and I do a lot of kind of Okinawan Chinese forms, which are very different. Okinawan Chinese forms are different. Those are Chinese forms that went to Okinawa. So they have a lot of karate kind of techniques in it, and a lot of the techniques have closed fist rather than open hand techniques, things like that. So they kind of were already put through a filter of Okinawan concept of uchinate, uchinati or urundi, that kind of stuff. Styles of Okinawa, it's quite different. But Kobudo, I also do kind of what I call Sogo Kobudo, Universal Kobudo. I trained with Matayoshi Shinpo on 5 different visits to Okinawa, so I kind of learned the Matayoshi system set. I trained with different Okinawan teachers, and I received a 9th dan in, I'm guessing right now, maybe 2015 or 2014 from Tichiban Kishaba Choke, who's the grandmaster of the Amani Bojutsu. So he's a very famous guy, and he graded myself and Kinjo Masakazu and a few other people because, the senior people still have to be graded by somebody. Unfortunately, he passed away. So now the main kind of the head of Kobudo in Okinawa is Nakamoto Masahiro Sensei. So he kind of looks after all the styles rather than just a singular style of his own styles. He does Ruki Kobudo, but he does a particular brand called the Bunbunkan, which is kind of their own concept of Ruki Kobudo. And they're all students of Taira Shinken. He's a student of Taira Shinken. The other lineage I practice with my friend Kinjo Masakazu, is from a different teacher, Mino Akatsuhiko, who was one of the 5 great Shihans of Taira Shinken. So I practice both Matayoshi Kobudo, Ruki Kobudo, and a little bit of Yamani Bojutsu. And I also went through, with Hokama Sensei and a few other teachers, I went through different village systems in Okinawa. Before karate was karate, and before Kobudo was Kobudo, different villages had different practicing different arts. Predominantly, it was bow-based. Bow is a 6-foot staff. But some villages would practice other weapons. They would practice what they call tinpei. Tinpei would be a shield. Now it's tinbei. Another styles would have sai techniques, and some system would use an oar. And the oar, I don't want to kind of get into kind of this kind of strange tangent, but in Okinawa, it's very difficult to separate martial arts in 3 different categories. So believe it or not, a lot of it was religious. So people would do weapons forms and empty hand forms as an incantation of traditional animalistic religions in Okinawa. The second one is obviously the life protection skills, and that divides into 2 different areas. So you have the court systems, which we practice by the equivalent of the samurai, and you have the peasant, what we think the fishing systems or the farm systems, with people who would practice protection of the property. So you have these kind of hybrid systems. Later on, now the sport karate system evolved. So now you're doing katas for dramatic effect, not necessarily for physical application. So you had katas basically that had religious overtones, practical self-defense, and in between there's a thing called matsuri. Matsuri means festival. So in Okinawa, so a lot of times when you go to a festival in Okinawa, there's a lot of martial arts performed at the festival, and quite a lot of it's called kumibo. And kumibo is kind of katas and jumping around, and sometimes done with gongs and trumpets, and people throw firecrackers at your feet when you're doing this stuff. And it's a performance piece, so it'd be almost like folk dancing. If you look at some North African systems, styles, troops, they will dance with a saber, that kind of stuff. So it's kind of, and a lot of people say, well, that's martial arts, that's not martial arts, but it's all rooted in martial arts. I mean, it's all rooted in fighting traditions. The main thing is that people don't have to fight anymore. So that's why it became more of a performance piece, because it's not really necessary to preserve your welfare and your livelihood and your family. So Okinawa has a long tradition of being invaded. So for a long period of time there were a thing called wako. Wako were pirates, and they were quite prolific in 15th, 16th, 17th century. And a lot of Okinawans became wako. So you have people, a lot of dangerous people would be coming through. So you have to really learn techniques of civil defense, self-protection. And, so you have the long weapons, you have the court weapons, which would be a weapon called bisento, which is almost like what we call the naginata, ihari, different styles, sword. A lot of people are not aware that in Okinawa, people use muskets or, like a blunderbuss as early as the mid 1500s, and there's a large cache, store of these muskets and cannons and things like that. So there were other weapons involved as well. So to me, to study Kobudo especially is to study history. So I'm really passionate about Kobudo because for me, it's like if you're really fan of English history or something like that, you want to see a jousting contest, you want to put on armor, that all the kind of stuff, and you kind of viscerally become part of the history. So for me, doing a kata is great. Grappling with my students or my friends or my colleagues is great. Sparring, whatever it is, it's all great. But when I do Kobudo, for some reason, I'm kind of almost like transported back in time in some ways, and I love that aspect of it. To give it a living thing, it's so important.
Yeah, it's like you're taking your place in history, or you're participating in it. Yeah, that's a neat feeling, for sure. You mentioned earlier there that when I was asking you about the mosaic of your own martial arts background, and you mentioned that you've developed and you teach your own system, which takes some from various other styles and or systems and so on. Would you say that styles are relevant? Like, is there such a thing as a style that's superior to another one?
So let's look at the name. So we're all familiar with a system called Ryu-Ha. Ryu is officially style. Ha means family. But Ryu, the character for Ryu actually means stream or river. Right? So if you see Shorin Ryu, Goju Ryu, or Ishin Ryu, or whatever it is, Ryu, it means a stream, and it's a flowing thing. Right? It's not a stagnant thing. I can't remember which famous philosopher said, "You never step in the same river twice." Right? It's a flowing thing. Right? So it's when you're talking about Ryu, it's not something archaic. It's the opposite. It's something which is progressive and moving forward. So every generation has to kind of improve on that stuff and foster those things. So, when you're talking about is Goju better than Shonru, are you talking about 1940? Are you talking about 1980? It's very ambiguous. I think that every martial art has something wonderful. I don't know if it was Walt Whitman, but somebody or whoever said the humorist who said, "I never met a med I didn't like." For me personally, I've never met a system of martial arts I didn't like. I think, there's great things. I didn't really think much of internal martial arts. I went to China, and I really spent time looking for internal martial arts. So I looked at Bakwa and Tai Chi, different forms of Tai Chi, and I found the main teacher of style called Xin Yi, but the one that kind of blew my mind was a style called Each One, or Philosopher's Fist. So I saw this in books, years ago. Richard Robert Smith's book, wow, Philosopher's Fist, all this stuff. And I went to the school and I trained with them. It was great. It was good. There's a lot of stuff is very practical. Some of the stuff is kind of hokey pokey, whatever. Standing like this, for 15 minutes and standing like 15 minutes and saying, I wanted to punch and kick, whatever. But then we got to that as well. So, and it's all a lot of your impression of martial art is where you come from. If you're a meat eater, you will appreciate a meat dish. If you're vegetarian, you'll appreciate. It's already you're predisposed to like those specific things. So I think the most important thing we have to remember martial arts. We have this path of martial arts, which is divided in three parts called Shu, Ha, Ri. Shu is to protect. Ha is to establish. Ri is to detach. So when you're talking to anyone who's been practicing 40, 50, 60 years of karate, they got to be in the Ri stage. They got to be detaching from set styles. So if Shu means my teacher is the best in the world. Ha is I'm a Goju, I do authentic Goju. Goju is the best system in the world. Ri is you question everything. You steal a little bit from here, you steal a little bit from here, steal a little bit from here, and you can try to formulate your own ideas, and you detach from the norm. And maybe you're criticized for it. I have a lot of friends if they're criticized for establishing styles and groups and things like that. So you have 90% that love them, and you have 10% of people that criticize them. And the people who criticize them are the ones who don't want to go out of their house. They don't want to travel anywhere. They don't want to do a seminar. They don't want to progress. Is the people who talk about the good old days. Like, oh, this guy, never mind. When I was a black belt, they would have killed him. Really? I question that. So progression is such an important thing. Growth.
So would it be safe to say then that in your opinion, styles confine confine one from reaching their potential, or?
I think having a style and a rigid system and teacher is essential. You know, if you go to any great museum like the Prado, or if you go to Uffizi Gallery in Italy, or if you go to Louvre, you will always see people copying famous paintings. So if there's a Mona Lisa, you'll see 25 students sitting there copying the Mona Lisa. So to me, the first stage, the restage, is you have to copy. You have to paint within the lines. You can't transcend the lines. So if here's Waldo, you have to make sure you paint exactly how it is. And gradually you progress. And if you look at martial arts as an art, if you look at someone like Picasso, you have to look at his work, his body of work. If you say to anybody who doesn't follow art, Picasso, they say, yeah, the nose here, the eye here, and the eye over here, that's Picasso. Well, if you look at his early paintings, he did the most realistic portraits of people ever. Perfect. He was the master copyist. Then in 1906, 1907, he went into the blue period, where he's painting still perfect things, except everything for some reason was blue. I'm not sure why. I would have asked him why, but he liked the color blue, I guess. And then gradually he started progressing where it was almost like a Zen thing, which is representation something, and maybe having something distorted is actually more authentic than the thing that started at the beginning. And I think maybe that's the path of Budo, Bujitsu. Budo is practice for self-improvement. Bujitsu is practice for self-protection. I think that's our goal. Our goal is kind of to mix things up. In Okinawa, there's a thing called champuro. Champuro means stew. Like you throw this, and it's champuro. Yeah. So I joke in Okinawa, and people say, what style kabuto do you do? And I said, champuro. And they all laugh, because it's ultimately, when you're dealing with very high-ranked people who are really expert, they don't really care what style you do. You do 2 strikes, and they go, joto, which means like good quality. Or you can say, I'm a 9th dan this, I'm a 10th dan in this, and this and that. And you go, and I go, oh, okay, sorry, very busy right now, can't talk to you, goodbye. So you can either get a joto, or you can say, oh, well, call me later, And so nobody really cares about stock. I'm talking about a higher level, on a very high, the highest level. People don't really care about rank or styles or anything like that. It's, you are who you are, and they either like you for that or they don't.
Yeah. So would you say then concepts are king over
yes.
style?
Yeah. You have to back up. You have theoretical stuff. And again, not criticizing anybody, but Ed Parker was the first guy. He American Kempo, student of K.S. Chow, and he made his Kempo style. He came up with these really elaborate names for techniques. The matrix of this and that, and it was like, and I said, what is it? It's a back fist.
Yeah.
Okay, well, why do you have a 15-word description for a back fist? And it was always, I met quite a few people who were almost like professorial in such a way. They wanted you to leave to think how awesome they were and how smart they were, but there's not much martial arts involved in that. Like to me, if you make chili, it tastes good, it tastes bad, right? I mean, it's not about like, let me explain this. This chili doesn't taste very good, but I got the purest beans and I flew to Texas and I got the thing. Wow. It still doesn't taste good, right? It's martial arts. I think that if you do good martial arts, it should taste good.
It should look good too, yeah.
Yeah.
So we were just chatting about concepts and so on. Do you have a favorite concept that you kind of lean on that's like a core concept for your own practice, or
you can take the philosophical aspect of it, things like that, but for me, basically everything divides into the kind of the 3 stages of combat. The go no sen, sen no sen, sen sen no sen. The how to response, the entering for the opening, and preemptive. So everything, whether you do grappling or not, it's the same thing. If you do striking arts, it's the same thing. If you do weapons arts, it's the same thing. If you're doing Filipino knife fighting, it's the same things. You either somebody has a knife, you defend the snake, you hit him in the hand, the knife falls down. Or if you're late, then you have to parry it. If you have to straggle at somebody, you better be able to sweep, whatever. So there's different stuff, but I truly think that every martial arts is almost like a slice of Swiss cheese. It's utterly delicious, but there's holes in it.
Yeah.
So you need to take 2 pieces of Swiss cheese and put it on top, and there's less holes. You take a 3rd piece of cheese and you put it on top. So a lot of people learn BJJ, but they will not give credit to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. A lot of people will do submission wrestling, like we'll train people like Eric Paulson, who's a very famous teacher from California. and they'll put it in their karate training, but will not give credit to these people. And I think it's important because when you train with these people, Jean-Jacques Machado, John Machado, Renzo Gracie, I do seminars all the time. I'm the worst guy on the mat, but I'm still there. It's really important to say, after the seminar, sometimes rather having 25 great techniques, you go, wow, I realize this is not working. My thing is not working. I have to do something. And the real work is not done at the seminar. The real work is done at the dojo. When you go back later and you say to your students, grab me like this. Well, that doesn't work. Grab me like, what I thought before. Now I have doubts. And that's when you have doubts, the beginning of progression. And progression is a goal to, learning. I don't think there's such a thing as success, really, because, every time you attain something, it just creates more openings and more questions, So I don't believe in excellence. Achievement is to achieve goals. But excellence is something which is very lofty, unreachable for us, I think.
Yeah, and it's also scary, to get out of your comfort zone and expose yourself to areas where you may not be strong and whatever. So yeah, I really like that Swiss cheese analogy though.
Yeah.
That's it's a visual. As somebody who really likes cheese, that's
so do I.
So so we talked about concepts. What about techniques? So, obviously you're doing both empty-handed and weaponized training and so on. Do you have a go-to technique or different techniques that are favorites?
No, because it's in a real, kind of, everything's dictated by your opponent or multiple opponents or situation or terrain. I mean, not to talk about Yamato Musashi Book of Five Rings, but there's all these things involved in combat, that happens organically. You don't, unless you're going to be preemptive and walk up and punch somebody before they turn around, you really can't, you can't really, have a plan. So it kind of your opponent's, the violent altercation will dictate how you're going to respond to it. And I think a couple things in martial arts, if you train a long time, you develop a sense of what we call ma-ai, distance and timing.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you saw the Guy Ritchie Sherlock Holmes movie, the very first one, Sherlock Holmes movie.
Actually, yes. It's
okay. So there's a scene where Sherlock Holmes is in a kind of a bare knuckle boxing match in a kind of a round circle.
It looked like Wing Chun. It looked almost like Wing Chun.
Right. So I mean, the actor studies Wing Chun, but I'm saying is he actually has this fight, and the same thing in Tom Cruise movie, The Last Samurai. You almost have this fight before actually it happens, right? Because you experience those techniques. So when somebody walks out, and everything kind of goes quiet, and the punch goes this fast at you, actually, because if you're used to it, and you're kind of going, oh, it's coming, it's not there yet, because rather than turning around, somebody punches you in the face. I mean, that's the only thing you really develop in martial arts, is have a precognitive awareness of martial arts on a high level. So go no sen, hard response, sen no sen, sensei no sen. But in Okinawa, the senior masters talk about something called bu sen or bu sai. And that's, in English might be sixth sense, and basically, if you think about it, it's not really sixth sense. If you're walking down the street and you're on your phone, you walk into somebody, you bump into the person who's there. But if you're aware, person is there, you just kind of, let the person move by. Or, if you're walking on the street and there's a light, street light burned down, if you're afraid of being late at night, why don't you cross the street and go where there's more light on that side, just things like that. And I think martial arts, the real value of studying martial arts is having more awareness rather than actually physicality, if you will. Right. The other thing I like to say, a lot of people practice like set drills, like yakusoku kumita, where you can promise sparring or one-step sparring or whatever it is, all that stuff. But it's motion-based, but there's no emotion, So emotion meaning that if somebody grabs your wrist, and I do this and this, and I do that. But if they pull you hard, it's a different response. If they pull you down, they're going to punch you in the hand. So in some ways, having this preset idea what you're going to do is not good, because the minute they change it, you fail. So that's why I think, grappling is awesome, because in grappling, you have so many different positions and planes of movement that you have to kind of fill in yourself, you know. And for me, it's almost like the Daruma doll, you know, you push it this way, it kind of bounces back like this, rather than karate opposing somebody, you know. So I think you just almost have to, we talk about accepting the attack, you know, or receiving the attack. You want to push me? No worry, push me. You know, I'll go with it. You want to pull me? Okay. When you finish pulling, then I'll respond, whatever it is. But I think a lot of people don't think of the you know, that kind of aspect. Like I said, there's motion, and people are so good at it, but emotion, they don't train emotionally. And the other thing in karate, you know, every punch you train, it always stops here, 1 inch, you know, 1 inch punch. And that goes from sparring, right? You have to be within 1 inch if you're, you know, and then Junri developed pads and people start doing light contact and whatever. Then Masoyama Kyokushinkai came out, you know, actually it predated Junri, obviously, and people could hit each other now, you know, so it's different kind of, oh, this actually hurts, you know, so you know, so I have to actually block and move around a little bit, whatever. If somebody round kicks, I have to move forward and take the kick rather than move back and get kicked harder. And that's through experience, you know, but I think every traditional karate person should get one of the students put a boxing glove and say, the student just hit me, you know. And they will always do this, not this way, you know, there's different planes, you know, they're going to push you, punch you, maybe, you know, and the whole thing is, if you're aware, it's about distancing, you know. And if you thought there was a punch coming and it's an elbow, okay, well then you readjust and, you know, whatever. But that's done on repetition. You have to do repetition, repetition, repetition. You know, and if you're just doing, you know, kata, or if you're doing one-step sparring, you don't develop those skills.
Yeah, you need that interaction with a live opponent for sure. So, question for you on tradition, and what are your thoughts on the importance of upholding traditions in martial arts training? So what I mean is, you know, the bowing, the terminology, that kind of stuff.
It's essential. You know,
It's
Napoleon
essential?
Bonaparte said tradition is very good because he has been around for a very long time. So, but the other great thinker, Junri, who invented safety equipment and many other things, I spoke to him in Washington, D.C. at the U.S. Capitol Karate Classic Championships in Washington, sponsored by Dennis Brown. And I actually said, beside him, we chatted a little bit, and he told me, he says, do you know what do you call, even though he's Taekwondo, he said, do you know what do you call karate without bowing? I said, what's that? He said, violence.
Sorry,
He said, what do you call karate without bowing? I said, I don't know. He said, violence.
Oh, violence.
So this whole thing, we're practicing, we talk about martial art, there has to be an art aspect to it. But filial piety, you know, this whole concept of honoring your parents, your country, and especially your teacher, you know, it's essential. It's essential. You know, like the people you're talking about that taught me, I don't really want to talk about them very much, but I thank them often, and I thank them every day, you know. So, and I call some of them just to say hello, and, you know, touch base and things like that. And whatever they need, anytime, I'll be there 100%. You know, there's no question about it, because I will never repay that debt. You know, it's just, you know, in Japanese culture, we wear giri and on, which is obligation and debt, and you never repay that. You never repay that. You know, in Japanese society, if you help me to find a job, let's say, whatever the job is, mechanic, every year, maybe in New Year's, I'll bring you a small gift. It's like a $2 gift. It doesn't really matter what it is, but for years and years, I will thank you for finding me that job. I find in Western society, we forget very quickly where we come from, you know, who helped us. It's almost like next, you know, and, you know, moving on. My roots are very steadfast. You know, my limbs will change and grow wherever they have to go, but my roots are immovable. And the people who helped me, you know, the people they're gold to me. You know, they're the most important people in my life.
So this actually is a good segue into the next question. Then is you know, obviously you're somebody who's made a career through the martial arts, still going, obviously.
We're trying. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Nowadays, it's a real challenge, for everyone. But you know, over the years, what would you say are some of the notable opportunities or realizations that were generated through your experience in the martial arts?
Well, as I said, I started teaching at the Y helping 70, 71, and I started my own dojo in 72. So I've been teaching for 50 years now, and at the beginning, when I started my own dojo, our students who were coming through the doors were all 18, 19, 20, 21, super fit, we don't get those students anymore. If they do martial arts, they're doing hybrid Muay Thai or a BJJ or something like that, because that's kind of, I don't mean to call BJJ flavor of the month, but there's kind of different martial arts which are kind of peak the public. When the series Kung Fu came out, Bruce Lee, people want to do Kung Fu. So like schools like Hanla Kung Fu School, they went from having 2 students on the floor, having 50 people in the class, So it just changes, secular, ninjutsu, this and that, we went through the Taibo stage, a lot of the karate schools were doing hot yoga and whatever, they're paying the bills, I understand. But really, for us, what we try to look at is karate as a vehicle for self-improvement, ultimately, So if you're talking about fighting, every martial art talks about whether you're punching art, grappling art, weapons art, there's a 3 basic categories, whatever. A lot of people will train 5, 10 years, 15 years, but they will never actually use those skills, nor they need them. We're living in a society, if we're in problem, we call a cop on our phone or whatever. So you don't really have to prove your martial arts. So if you're just practicing martial arts for the sake of fighting, you're not getting your money's worth. So to me, there's so many other aspects which are so important. The social aspect, people coming together. We live in a world which is, we're talking through Zoom right now because of COVID and things like that. We're limited to what we do. But, the human interaction, people are so, tech savvy that they don't know how to be with somebody. I'll tell you, major difference. 30, 40 years ago, if you told kids to shake hands, they would shake hands. Now, when I tell kids, okay, bow and shake hands, they have no idea what that means. Like, they don't know how to shake hands with somebody, just the physical contact. It's not something that you're doing. So martial arts teaches you body awareness, all those things, respect for the other people, interaction, for little kids, waiting to take your turn, making sure. So you're providing, we're no longer about fighting. We're about life skills, if you will, and that's why it's so popular with the kids and not with the adults. The core age group of 18 to 30-year-olds, they think they already have those skills, and they're wrong. They don't have those skills, In fact, they have less of those skills because, we're living in a society of me, meism. I know everything. We joke about being PhD from the University of iPhone. Because you know everything instantly. Because you know everything instantly, you don't know anything. I mean, you went to Dalhousie University. I'm sure you majored in something. But whatever it is, I can tell you that you're wrong because I checked, the site, whatever, and you're wrong. Whatever. I can cite some source, which is hokey source. In martial arts, that's happening even more so, because it's a very easy thing to digest this information without actually doing something, Like, I don't know if you watch on YouTube, I came across these things where people criticize other martial artists. Like, they'd be like, and I'm going to give you my take on this Aikido demonstration. Well, his foot is wrong there, and he didn't grab him the right way there. Or they watch BJJ people like, well, obviously, if Santovo would have done this, then the whatever his nickname is then would have done that because he should have done an omoplata when he did it. I don't know if these people actually train in martial arts, but they know everything, right? So, but a local Canadian martial artist, Joel from Revolution, he just competed in the World Masters Championship. He came in 3rd, and he's disappointed he came in 3rd. I think it's awesome. He actually got in the ring, and he made it. It's incredible. I mean, it's just, you got to do something. It's better to fail doing something than know everything and be an expert.
We spoke a little bit before about, in the introduction, I mentioned your organization, and it was founded. I guess you founded it with the first school in 1972. You were saying, and then obviously it's grown over the years. Can you share a little bit of that journey? Like, you started out with, teaching in grade 9, and then ultimately you would have opened your own school, and then that would have turned into multiple schools, and now where you are right now. Because
if I can say one word preemptively, it's
sure.
I have incredible students. Okay, The reason why I'm using air quotes is because they've been with me for 40, 45 years. Okay, I have many students being with me for 30 years. I have 100, people with me for 30 years. And I had students, Steve Wooslis, Marion Munzo, et cetera, Mick Walsh, Cosbona. I can name, these Amit Sandra, on and on. They've been training for 40, 45 years, and they're masters in their own right. So I just want to tell you a little bit of what Northern Karate is. Yep. Northern Karate is me and them. And the division is very difficult. I don't know where I end and those people begin. So my students, they have many generations of their own black belts, right? So I have students who have their own, 5th or 6th degree black belts themselves. So technically, they're my students. But we research, we travel together, we explore. So that's why the only reason why I'm so successful is because I'm not a me, I'm a we. So that's really it. And there's an Italian word we joke all the time. It means a term, tutto mangiare. Everybody eats.
Everybody eats.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's not a solitary thing where I take everything for myself. Is if I have 10 seniors at a table and I'm there with them, we slice something 11 pieces. If another person arrives, I make sure I learn from my mother, like 12 pieces. Everybody eats something, and so it's not just financial remuneration for teaching or running business or schools. There's also respect and time in a limelight. I find a lot of very senior instructors, they're jealous of their students. They will actually. They want to steal the limelight. They think if they put somebody younger, they kick punch better, then they're not going to ask them for it. How wonderful is it to be eclipsed by your own students? You've done your job. It's like a parent saying, "Well, my son is found a cure for COVID. I hate him." It doesn't make any sense. With martial arts, we're still jealous. And in the last year or two, I found these very senior martial artists kind of insulting each other back and forth about nothing. It boils down to one thing, and it's just the other person is a little more successful in that area, and they don't realize that they're more successful in a different area. And the whole thing is I've heard about academic jealousy sometimes. University people maneuver and push somebody out of a chair. They want their job and their tenure position or whatever. But it's happening in martial arts, and I'm confused because it's happening from the most senior people that I know. And they should know better. They should know better, because together we can accomplish anything. We can overcome anything. But if I discount you, I'm actually chipping away at myself as well. So it doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm. So when you started out, did you have any grand visions of creating this, empire, if you will? No.
I went from opening a school to buying a van, and I put as many students as I could in the van. We would go to a tournament. So we would go every single weekend. Went to a tournament, and sometimes I went to 2 tournaments on the weekend. We'd go quite a few times. I went from Montreal to Chicago. I went from northern Quebec to Pittsburgh and Ohio, and we got lost so many ways. And for me, the competition was not about winning a 6-foot plastic trophy. It was about making contacts and learning things. And I learned a great deal. And then gradually I would stay a day or two after the tournaments. We had friends, we would exchange techniques. I would teach in their school. They would come up to Toronto, teach for me, that kind of stuff. So I learned a great deal, a great deal. I learned a lot of things about business running the school from a teacher, famous fighter named Jeff Smith, who helped me tremendously, how to run school. And then later on became friends with John and Howard Chung in the early 80s, who were nephews of Jun Rhee, and Jun Rhee at that time had the largest schools in the US. Very good friend with another teacher by the name Larry Carnahan from Minnesota. He helped me a great deal. They had schools called Mid-America Karate. So basically through competition, starting from 1980, I would go around, and after the competition, I would stay a day or two and visit the local schools. And start 80, I would collect all the yellow pages from the local cities to see how they their ads, and I developed friendships with these people. And because I competed, they would help me. If I was just a guy off the street, they would never give me the time of the day. But because I competed with them, whether I won or they beat me, whatever it was, we had some sort of connection. And I would say, do you mind if I come to your school? I said, sure, come to my school, whatever. Here, in fact, here's my operating manual. And like, operating manual? What does that mean? I said, well, here's an operating. The first page, it said junior manual. You have to clean the bathroom at 10 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and 6 o'clock. What? Nobody cleans the bathroom. You clean the bathroom when the toilet overflows, right? And gradually I start taking those concepts, bringing them back, and applying to a kind of professional environment of running a school, if you will.
So at what point then did you realize that you had an organization under you and not just a collection of students and different schools?
Very, very early, I had students join from competition. So, you know, we would go to tournaments and myself and a few of my students would win, you know, so people want to kind of gravitate towards you. So I had a lot of people from other schools coming and saying, can I come and work out with you guys? Okay, come and work out with us. And eventually they would join. And so with my first place, 395 Keel Street, all our students came from other martial arts schools. Basically, we'd go to tournament on Saturday. On Monday, 2 people would sign up. We'd go to tournament on Saturday, 3 people would sign up on Monday. And that's kind of how we collected the students. And they also brought a lot of skill, a lot of information. You know, they were quite good to start with. So it's kind of grew from there. But I never really thought about establishing an empire. I think by probably our mid-70s, 76, 77, we had a number of schools. We had a school in Barrie with Randy Punchin. We had a school in Queen Street, Ferntilly, Derry Doyle in St. Catharines. And these are people who were black belts almost the same time that I was. They kind of gravitated toward me through competition, and they all became Northern Karate, even though they'd been my colleagues, you know, and some of them were older than I was. But they kind of liked what we're doing, you know. So we expanded very, very quickly. And then my core students eventually developed their own schools, and you know, and now those schools develop other schools, and schools develop other schools, et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of it's a fraternal organization, really. It's not a business, you know. And we still get together. We're probably the only martial arts school that's been in business 49 years that has a monthly directors class where all the school operators come together and we train. You know, we're physically trained. You know, so. And that's what keeps us grounded together. And you know, something that I share always with my students, in order to be a teacher, you have to be a student. The minute you stop being a student yourself, you're almost a liar as a teacher. You know, it's just, if you don't have the passion to learn something new every day, how could you motivate other people? You know?
So you've had, you know, the benefit of and I'm not trying to discount your success in any way, but you know, you've had the benefit of like a 50-year head start on you know, somebody comparing to somebody who, you know, may be looking to open his or her own dojo at this point, and with maybe plans or maybe not plans, but plans to be successful and plans to pass on some knowledge and to build a community and that kind of thing. What advice would you have for someone like that who is looking to, you know, create their own, maybe their own empire, or at least their own?
Well, first of all, you know, don't do it out of greed and don't do it out of ego. You know, in some ways, you know, the term samurai means ones who serve. So you have to be willing to serve. And a major event happened for me when I stopped competing. When I stopped competing, when I was still competing, I wanted to run a school. I want to have my students to be successful and all that stuff. I want to be that. But ultimately, I had to train for the competition. But then I stopped competing. It was about us, you know. So it really has to be a holistic concept. If you want to make a living out of it, that's fine. You know, if you want to have people treating you nicely and bowing to you, that's nice too. But you have to teach for the sake of, you want to be a teacher. It's just like saying, if you want to become a grade 5, you know, math teacher, you know, how do you do that? The same thing. There has to be almost a calling to it, I think. You know, and I think a lot of people go into the martial art profession, so to say, kind of wrong way, because, you know, maybe they're not successful in other things, but when they put on their black belt, people are nice to them and they bow to them and they call them special titles, things like that. So they say, well, I want more of this. Obviously, you know, this feels great. You know, this is awesome. But what do you have to give back? You know, and I always said, for our students, the reason why we're successful is because we under promise and over deliver. You know, so whatever it is, if I tell you, you know, at 6 o'clock your blue belt will be waiting for you because now we're doing curbside pickup. I never thought I'd say that word in my life in a martial arts school. You can't have students coming into the school. You have to hand it to them through the door. You know. So if I say we're going to have a belt at 6 o'clock, if you arrive there at 6:01, somebody goes, belt? Which belt? No, the belt has to be waiting there an hour before you arrive. You know, it's just so. But the same thing with lesson plans. All our senior instructors, we do like class plans and lesson plans. Nobody walks in, fixes their belt, and says, "Let me show you how awesome my hook kick is." That's not an educational thing. You know, there has to be a lesson plan which is designed for the students. When the students end the lesson, they have to learn something. They have to improve a little bit at the end of the lesson.
You know, if you could do it all over again, is there anything that you do differently? And the follow up to that is, or what do you know now that you wish you knew earlier?
It's nothing, because everything is progressive. It's almost like steps, walking up the steps. I wouldn't go to step 3 if I didn't do the step 1, and so it's just a progression of things. And good things, the bad things, is all education. Everything's there. So learning traditional kind of Chituru karate, giving very good basics, nice horse stance. I can take that, so when I do a bow strike now, whatever, I'm using the Chituru stance I learned as an orange belt, So everything is there, grappling. I have a lot of very good friends who do grappling on a very high level. I met a teacher from France, Alan Saïd, almost 30 years ago, and we started doing some training with him. He's got a unique style called Goshindo, which kind of is a hybrid between karate, aikido, and jiu-jitsu. And he says, "Well, your students pick up so fast because they have good basics. They have good posture, good stances." So everything kind of, maybe at the beginning you don't really recognize how valuable those things are. Later on, they come into play. So my role models, my senpais, my 2 senpais are still in existence, Wally Slokey and Monty Guest. I watched them, they helped me, in some ways, grew through. Then my colleagues, like my great colleague, Patrick McCarthy, his research, the old saying, don't learn what the masters sought, but what they know, but seek what they sought, and then through Pat, he opened my mind on research. So I didn't learn from Pat, but Pat gave me the passion, the joie de vivre to actually go and learn stuff. That wouldn't happen without Pat. That wouldn't, nice hook around psychic. That wouldn't happen without Wally Slokey. Monty Guest. I would never meet Soroka Sensei if it wasn't for Monty Guest, and so on and so on. And it goes back to that Geary aspect that I'm talking about. The respect. Those things. So when you're saying about what I would do different, nothing. Those people helped me a great deal, and I have the genetic code to do more.
So over your many decades of experience and so on, have you had any eureka moments that kind of stand out for you? Like
I think injuries were eureka moments, definitely.
They're great teachers. Yeah.
My knee exploded. So I had to have it reconstructed. I was in the hospital for 9 days, and I had a bunch of surgeries. I have 2 hip replacements. I have shoulder fixed and screws and whatever. Realizing that was mortal. I was 19 years old. Any heavy bag I met, I would try to knock it off the chain with a flying sidekick. Now when I see heavy bag, I push it a little bit. I go, oh, that's too heavy. I'm not gonna punch that. Because I have to wrap my hands before I do that. I think it's interesting because I went from being a child to somebody now in mid-60s. And I experienced all aspects of karate life. Like a child, a teenager, cocky teenager, a 22-year-old, 23-year-old black belt, a son and me down who knows everything. Being a champion of all things. I was the best. Going to Okinawa, learning I know nothing. It's ebb and flow like this. But everything was a great learning experience, and everything served the purpose. And through injuries and things like that, I had to rethink my own martial arts. I started grappling like BJJ kind of stuff almost 20 years ago. I have a really good friend and former student, Vito Brancaccio. So he introduced me to the Machado family almost 20 years ago. I didn't really do much with it, but my wife is from New York, Marion Monza, who's an amazing martial artist in her own right. She's the first woman in Canadian Black Belt Hall of Fame. So that's a separate podcast talking about her. So we won't go into details there. But because we're going to New York, I started training with Renzo Gracie at his school. I got my blue belt, etc., things like that, and then my hip went. My first hip replacement went back, so in private classes. My second hip went. And I stopped doing grappling. And now I'm motivated through my students, Cos Vona, who's an exceptional grappler, Mark Manalo just got his black belt in December, Leslie, etc., Vito Oscucci. I have these guys who are outstanding grapplers. They're our students. They learn karate from us, but they're much better in grappling than I am. When I watch them, they encourage me to get back on the mat, and I'm getting back on the mat, and that's something I look forward to. And again, I demoted myself to white belt. I was a purple belt, so I demoted myself. Because it's reality, you have to erase your past and reinvent yourself every day, And I look forward to working my basics on the ground, It's just, And if I end up being a blue belt in the next 5 years, awesome. If not, it doesn't really matter. I'll be there. So.
So what is it that you would say keeps you going, like keeps you interested, keeps you engaged after all this time and all the injuries you've had and all the lessons you've learned? Like what keeps you wanting to get out on the mat?
I am obsessed about martial arts, and I don't mean that in, like, I've never bowled in my life. I went bowling once. I went with a karate camp, and I bowled once. I have no hobbies except martial arts. I have nothing. I mean, I like to cook. There's okay, maybe I try to study Japanese. Whatever. I have hobbies, but I think that maybe martial art related. But I have no interest in doing parkour or mountain climbing or anything like that. I travel with my wife. I've been to Asia maybe 60 times, and there's always a martial art component to all that stuff. Either it's straight to train martial arts, or we do a day at a nice spa hotel, whatever. And the next day I go off to do Silat or Viet Vo Dao, whatever it is. I've been to Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, all these, India, whatever. And just I can't get enough martial arts, And it's my greatest fear is that my life is not going to be long enough to learn enough stuff. That's the only thing I'm worried about. If I had 10 lifetimes, I could learn a lot of stuff.
Well, if you ever crack that code, please, the rest of us. Earlier on, we were talking about the Olympics and karate in the Olympics, and I'm curious, as somebody who's, well, I don't know, is it fair to call you a traditionalist when it comes to and application?
I'm comfortable in any arena, basically. I mean, it's, I think our karate is still fairly traditional, I would say, yes.
Yeah, okay. So just curious about, your thoughts on the potential, if it happens this year finally, Olympic style karate or sport karate in general, as it is right now through the WKF.
Well, you have to look at martial arts from a unique perspective. So before 1964, judo was introduced in the Tokyo Olympic in 1964. Judo was the killer art. James Bond did judo. Every picture was the judo chop, and Odd Job would kill people with a judo chop, whatever. Judo was that once you saw people in Olympics pulling at each other, and big fat Russian guy, is there, the gi comes apart, and all this stuff. You go, that's judo. So then Taekwondo became very, very popular in the 70s and 80s. People jump, 12 feet up in the air and break boards, all this stuff. And then 88 Olympics started, and people start bouncing and kicking the hodo, the pad. And they go, acha, acha. Well, okay. So the problem with a lot of martial arts is not the fact that they go into Olympics, is because the rules become obsessed about the rules. So you have this this martial art, which is so many different elements. Let's say Taekwondo. When Taekwondo was named by General Choi Hong-hee in 55, 54, whatever, it was basically Japanese karate, and they kind of adapted it to different systems, things like that. But they had a lot of self-defense. They had all kinds of stuff. Then it becomes an Olympic sport. It's about scoring. You have the set of rules, and the rules dictate how you're going to train. So you only train for the rules. So I fear that karate will become a rule-oriented thing, where people only train to win a gold medal, right? So which is a highly developed skill. But if you win a gold medal in kata, can you actually defend yourself? Can you spar? Can you, there's other aspects you have to do. And to me, the martial art is like I said, you have to be an all-rounded martial artist. You can't be, a specialist. And I think that'll be it for karate in Olympics. People will become, the daily ritual will be. I'm friends also with a very famous teacher, Sakamoto Tsugo, who was multiple-time world champion. He's actually the coach of the Japanese kata team, and all his students have won all the qualifying tournaments, and he's got a male student who will definitely win gold medal and stuff. But their system, I've been watching their system, it just becomes the stream of how to win a gold medal, and that's and Sakamoto Sensei is all-around martial artist. He's one of possibly the best karate teacher in the world, but he has to teach specific skills for students to win a gold medal.
So is there a risk then with it going into the Olympics? I don't know much about Taekwondo, but I've heard through various people that the Olympics essentially has it's not been good for Taekwondo.
No, it hasn't been good for judo in the 60s after the Olympics either. Judo, gradually disappeared. Karate took over judo because karate was mysterious and judo was this wrestling thing. And it's and the same thing. When people look at it, they'll say, "Oh, this is karate. I know this. I don't want to do that." But if karate is mysterious, jiu-jitsu is mysterious, whatever, then you kind of have to discover it, right? So sometimes making things too obvious, too accessible, is not good for us in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and this is just my own opinion. The way I look at Olympic competition, especially with these types of well, the Olympics is about entertainment.
Yes.
Right. So karate can be entertaining to watch. The traditional, all the way up to the sport. And
it's gone out of the Paris Olympics already. I mean, it was supposed to be 2020.
Breakdancing is being
breakdancing, and it's
but breakdancing, sure.
Can you explain something? In Korea, they have stadiums for people playing video games that hold 65,000 people, and you can watch people playing video games. Who would want to watch another person play video games?
Apparently 60,000 people at a time.
Right.
Yeah, no, I guess, different strokes for different folks, but yeah, I wonder, if I'm almost a little nervous about the effect that the Olympics will have on karate in terms of people's expectation when they are looking for an activity for their children or for themselves or whichever. Does that concern you at all?
Very much so. I mean, the whole thing about karate is that it's an inclusive activity. Everybody can participate in it. If it's an elite sport, it becomes elite sport. And I think in Ontario, we're still kind of more recreational than anything else. In Canada, we're more recreational than anything else. I have a lot of friends, my colleague Sam Maletsky, that you know very well, who's an awesome guy. He can speak a lot more to the competition aspect of it, that kind of stuff. But nobody brings a child in saying, "Hi, this is Billy. He's 5 years old, and I would like him to be a gold medalist in the Olympics." That thought is never there. Maybe if you're playing hockey, there's always, you're thinking about maybe one day my son will play for NHL. But in karate, it's about having fun, participating, learning skills, learning respect, self-discipline. Those things. Those are still paramount, and I think we will definitely work promoting those values more than ever.
Yeah, I think that's the only thing really we can do if karate is going to survive into the future.
Yeah.
Okay. My final question that I try to ask everybody. Sometimes I don't get the opportunity to, but it's one of my favorite questions to ask, and especially for someone like you who's an inductee into the Black Belt Hall of Fame. What does a black belt mean to you? Like, and I've been countered with questions by one of the people I interviewed, in particular, Norma Foster. She kind of pushed back on that question a little bit to make me make it a little more specific. So I'll follow her lead and say, what does a shodan mean to you?
My first black belt, I awarded my first black belt in 1974, 75, or 74, maybe Modulodia. The second one, a couple black belts got spun out. So they're still my friends. One lives in California, one lives in Vancouver, And for 4 or 5 years, I basically promoted one black belt a year. Then maybe 2 black belts a year, 3 black belts a year. Before the madness of last year, we're Northern Karate Schools, we're producing maybe 500-600 black belts a year. That's because we would have 11,000 or 12,000 active members. So if you do the numbers, we're actually maybe promoting less than a dojo of 50 people, or 100 people, 150 people. We're actually promoting less. And it still takes anywhere from 4 to 6.5 years on the average to become a black belt in our schools. But the age is getting younger because the students are participating younger and younger. We have a lot of kids starting at 3, so it just changes. It changes, So in our schools, you don't receive a shodan when you become a black belt. You become shodan ho. And for a year, you have to maintain your training, improve your skills, and then you'll get your belt with a certificate after a year. So there's a kind of probationary period for that. And a lot of teenagers, especially, they will quit within that 1 year because it's just, my mom told me I have to go to karate until I get my black belt. Or she paid for me to get my black belt, whatever the term is. And when I hear that, to me, that's, we're done here, right? But still, nevertheless, you know, they're still coming to classes, whatever it is. It's really, and I have older students who struggle to become Shotans, and there's somebody who are incredible. The achievement who went into getting the Shodan is remarkable. And we have other kids who take it for granted. So really, you know, in 50 years I've been teaching, I've seen it change so much. Black belt was, when I started, the first time I went to Soroka Dojo, I didn't know there was degrees of black belt. And I saw a certificate on the wall, said Master Soroka 5th degree black belt, wherever Sensei was at that time. I was like, my God, there's levels, you know, like I didn't know there were things, like, wow, there's like duns, you know, I did not know that. I thought black belt was the ultimate thing, you know, and when I started teaching, there was a guy named Bailey who had a dojo on Harvard Street. He was a brown belt. So it was normal for people to be brown belts running dojos, especially if you're in a remote area, London, or if you're talking about maritime provinces. If you're in Toronto, you're a brown belt, you establish a dojo, you're a blue belt or brown belt, you're running a dojo. So black belt was something really unique and very special. You know, I remember my first black belt meeting when I went in there. I looked at everybody, it was like, wow, they're all killers, you know, like it was incredible it was a privilege to be in the room with these people. Now, not so much, you know, not so much. It's just, you know, it's almost like filling boxes. I come to classes enough, I do this, I learn the right katas, I learn the right pad drills, whatever, I get my black belt, you know. So it's changed a great deal, but it's really the student. It's not the black belt that changed. The students have changed. You know, just it's a different group of people you're dealing with completely.
So what would you say that it signifies then? Is it, I know it used to be, or at least through the lineage of teachers that I've been exposed to, you know, the old school philosophy on it was that it's kind of like a rite of passage. So
Right.
if you're a teenager, it's almost like, you know, you're becoming a man or a woman when you receive it. And I know the philosophies are different. You know, I think in Japan, from the conversation I had with Sensei Peter Giffen, he indicated that in his mind, because I don't have that experience, but in his mind, he thought that the philosophy in Japan was you get a black belt that shows that you're ready to learn.
Right.
As in North America, it was more like the pinnacle.
Right.
And then there's, you know, the other degrees that go beyond that.
Well, to discuss ranking, really, that's a show in itself. You know, to talk about Jigoro Kano's intention of having, you know, post samurai ranking system. So, you know, after Meiji Restoration, the Q and the Dan system came in for non-samurai class to advance in rank, to have some sort of recognition. Prior to that, they did a different scroll system, Mokoroku system, where you get Kaiden, Meikyo Kaiden, other things, which sword art still preserve those traditions. But it's really the way I understand is Shodan is first level, first step. You know, so it's a learning point. That's really when you become a apprentice of specific style or system. You know, at the Shodan level. And like I said before, when everybody was a Shodan, that was the pinnacle. Now we kind of return it back to the original idea that as a Shodan, you can actually start learning the system. And we talk about the Shuhari kind of thing. Shodan is still very much in the first stage. For me, first to third or fourth dan, you're still in the first stage. You know your dojo is the best. Then fourth, fifth dan to maybe sixth, seventh dan, you establish your own dojo. My dojo is the best. My students are the best. Whatever. And Ri is you start detaching. The Ri is maybe eighth dan level, you know, around eighth dan level, where you don't really see superiority. There's no ego. It's all about exchanging ideas and learning all those things. But it starts off with a Shodan. It doesn't start with a green belt. It doesn't start with a brown belt. So I would say the whole karate path begins at the Shodan level. You're ready to learn.
It's more of a mindset as opposed to a skill set.
Yeah.
Okay. Very, very interesting. And yeah, I thank you very, very much for agreeing to do this today. I found it very enlightening. I'm sure those who are watching will also. And you know, and I now have a new appreciation for Swiss cheese. I've got to say.
Perfect.
I won't think of that I won't think of it the same anymore. So really, really appreciate your time and sharing your knowledge and your experiences. And, you know, just thank you so much for.
Thank you very much. it's a pleasure for me. And like I said, sharing views and things like that, those are my personal views, but I think they're echoed through our community, And I just like to leave with something that we're stronger together. Being divided is not great. We first and foremost, we're Canadian martial artists. Secondly, we're Canadian karateka. Then we're Canadian Chitaru or Goju people, whatever. And then we're of our dojo, But I think we have to have an identity. We have to be holistic and together. And that's one of the benefits of the Canadian Black Belt Hall of Fame. You recognize people from judo and taekwondo and MMA and things like that. And Canadian Black Belt Hall of Fame brought these great individuals together that maybe otherwise would not sit at the same table. You're talking about Norma Foster. She's somebody who's very much on the list to be inducted in Canadian Black Belt Hall of Fame. The only problem is we didn't have it, so she would be there. So my mission to have is as many different streams of Canadian martial arts coming together. So I hope, through your program and other programs, we can actually have more conversation and more sharing and more learning. Okay, that's it.
Yeah, I think we all have a lot we can learn from each other.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you again, Sensei. It's been a real.
It's really my pleasure, Charles. Thank you so much, and we'll speak soon.
Okay. Thank you.
We'll